Hey there! Welcome to Social Studies with Miss Rogers, World History Edition. Today we're going to be learning about Eastern Asia's reaction to European exploration. We specifically will focus on China and Japan. The last time we focused on these two areas in the Middle Ages, we saw the Mongols take over China and establish the Qing Dynasty, and Japan created their own feudal system or Bakufu system. Both of these nations will see major issues in European exploration, and this will have serious ramifications for other parts of the world. So, let's take a look and see what reality check is awaiting the Europeans. Even though the Mongols studied up on Chinese culture, language, and history, they were never actually accepted as Han Chinese. The term Han Chinese refers to the Han Dynasty, China's highest peak in success, and historically represents the idea of a true Chinese person. What that means is the Mongols were always seen as outsiders and were not accepted by the local people as one of them. Eventually, there was a rebellion led by a peasant at the time, Hong Wu, to overthrow the Yuan dynasty. Thus, the Ming Dynasty was created with Hong Wu as the first emperor. The Ming Dynasty was remembered for three successes. The first was stabilizing China and creating an era of peace and prosperity for about 300 years. 2. With great stability comes great wealth. China becomes one of the most, if not the most, wealthy nation in the world. And lastly, the Ming worked to preserve their Chinese culture, an achievement that would last even through the next dynasty. There are many who would like to add the Great Wall of China to this list of successes for the Ming, which the Great Wall was a massive part of Chinese history. But first of all, the Great Wall was not originally created under the Ming. It was just restored and fixed up by the Ming. Second of all, the Great Wall that the Ming put so much time, effort, and money into to keep out invaders didn't keep out invaders. So, great part of history? Yes. Successful part of Ming history? I guess that depends on who you ask. A major contribution to stabilizing China was bringing back traditional aspects of society. For example, the Mongols were Muslim, so the Ming brought back traditional Confucian ideals. Another example, do you remember the civil service exam we mentioned a long time ago during the Middle Ages? Well, that was nixed by the Mongols, and the Ming brought it back. As a reminder, the civil service exam was a test that, thanks to Empress Wu, all of China was allowed to take as an application to bureaucracy jobs. The civil service exam ensured that only the best of the best within society could touch government jobs. The test quizzed people on Chinese history and philosophy, among other subjects, to make sure that each individual in a position of power stayed true to Confucian principles. Because of how serious this exam was taken by Chinese society, there are many who argue that by this point in history, China had the most educated population that had ever existed. China was so wealthy at this time that the Chinese expected a tribute to be paid by inferior nations. A tribute is a payment from one country to another that's only purpose is to recognize the superiority of another nation. So yes, China was making other nations, such as Korea, pay them just to acknowledge that China was better than them, and as a reward, they may now trade with China. When Hong Wu died, his son Yongle came to the throne, and Yongle was very interested in not only exploring the world, but expanding this tribute system. Emperor Yongle set up the first of 7 voyages that would showcase China's wealth to other nations around the world. Zheng He was the admiral who led all 7 of these voyages. Zheng He would travel around the Indian Ocean just showcasing the enormous amount of wealth China possessed and maintaining the idea that China was the center of the economic universe. To put some things into perspective for you, this is a size comparison of the kind of ships Europeans such as Christopher Columbus sailed and the kind of treasure ships Zheng He led. Think of 300 of these in the water. This sight was definitely a head-turner, something that would not be forgotten easily and would attract people to China. I like to compare these voyages to Mansa Musa putting Africa on the map. Mansa Musa led this incredibly luxurious Hajj, giving gifts along the way, and it made people interested in Africa when it came time for exploration. That's exactly what's going on here with Zheng He and his 7 voyages. He's going around the Indian Ocean boasting about the Ming Dynasty, how great it is, how powerful it is, how wealthy it is, and giving fancy gifts along the way, just as an example of how valuable the goods are in China. The hope was that so many new nations would want to do business with the Chinese that China would be able to add numerous new nations to the tribute system. These explorations of Zheng He pretty much became a maritime Silk Road. These expeditions are just one of the main reasons that trade with China became such a desired idea. They were very extravagant and very expensive, which also led to their end. Chinese officials complained that they wasted so many resources, and there was no logical reason to continue them. So after the 7th of these journeys ended, the Chinese took more of an isolationist approach to the world. The Ming were proud of stabilizing China and bringing back so many traditional aspects of Chinese society. Therefore, the Ming were not interested in outsiders bringing any of that cultural diffusion nonsense with them. Since China was not paying for any more extravagant expeditions, the money could be put towards something the Chinese thought of as more useful, like, I don't know, the Great Wall of China? The Great Wall of China started being built much earlier in history, like 221 BC type early. But due to the wall needing to be fixed up, most of its construction was actually under the Ming. The Great Wall was an attempt to keep the peaceful and prosperous atmosphere they created safe from invaders or anyone else who might try to shake up their society. Christian mercenaries did show up hoping to convert Chinese people to Christianity, but educated Chinese people just rolled their eyes at their attempts, which would lead to China creating policies to discourage foreigners from even coming to China. Chinese policies such as raising taxes on trade and industry and lowering taxes on things like agriculture encouraged the Chinese to continue their self-sufficient streak and not want or even need goods from foreign nations. More attempts to control foreign influence on China included the Chinese government only allowing foreign trade to occur under their watchful eye through 3 ports in the entire country. You know that saying, super strict parents make super sneaky kids? Yeah, apply that here. Hopefully, unlike the Chinese government apparently, you've heard of the black market. So even though China attempted to control foreign trade, smugglers took matters into their own hands anyways. Trade was thriving, and this just shows how weak the Ming was starting to become. Regular people and even government officials started seeing laws as optional, and the Ming became so weak and oblivious, they didn't even realize they were being invaded by northerners from Manchuria until the Manchus were knocking on their front gate in Beijing. Thanks, Great Wall. You really helped with that one, friend. In case you couldn't see where this was going, this is the fall of the Ming Dynasty and the start of the Qing Dynasty. Another group of outsiders taking over China but still using a Chinese name. Like the Mongols and the Yuan, we now have the Manchus and the Qing. Just to be clear, Han Chinese do not consider Manchus to be one of them, just like they didn't consider the Mongols one of them. Now, unlike the Mongols who were Muslim, the Manchu adopted Chinese Confucianism in hopes that assimilating to the Chinese way of life would help the Chinese accept them. I guess this would be a really good group to compare to the Macedonians when they took over ancient Greece. It definitely took some time, but the Manchu eventually received Han Chinese respect. Did they consider them Han Chinese? No. And the Qing would actually be the last Chinese dynasty to exist. Under the Manchus, China continued the idea of the kowtow. The kowtow is where another country would acknowledge the superiority of China and bow their forehead to the ground 9 times, all for the privilege of trading with China. This was not something nations such as England were interested in. The English thought it would be China's privilege to trade with them, and China said, you know what? I don't think we can be friends. Run along now. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Nations such as the Dutch, however, were more than happy to participate in the kowtow, so the Dutch were really the only Europeans granted access to Chinese trade for a really long time. And other nations would have to focus their attention to different areas, like maybe Japan? Japan's world changed when the Portuguese showed up on their shores wanting to trade, because the Portuguese had weapons for sale, like guns. One particular daimyo named Oda Nobunaga thought, these look like they could come in handy. Nobunaga used the guns to force surrounding daimyo into submission, and he starts his quest to unify Japan with a super inspirational motto, rule the empire by force. Does he succeed in this quest? No, he doesn't. He must have threatened the wrong person because Nobunaga was set to be assassinated. In order to die with his honor, Nobunaga actually committed seppuku, the samurai's honorable death by suicide. His successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, continues his unification attempt, but it isn't until his successor, Tokugawa Ieyasu, that we see a complete unification of Japan. In this new unified Japan, we don't see the same social or political structure as before. For example, the concepts of emperor and shogun have kind of morphed into one being over time, still going by the name shogun. Shogun Ieyasu created the alternate attendance policy to tame the daimyo who still governed at a local level. The alternate attendance policy said that these daimyo had to leave their families every other year and live at the capital to show their loyalty towards their country. These daimyo were basically held hostage for a year at a time every alternating year, but it honestly did stabilize the idea of law and order. They say the rule of law overcame the rule of sword. Ieyasu's words of advice to his son would inspire shoguns for generations. Take care of the people, strive to be virtuous, and never neglect to protect the country. The European merchants had been present in Japan for a while. I mean, it was the arrival of the Portuguese and their guns that made this unification of Japan possible. The Europeans, though, clearly didn't know how to read the room and quickly overstayed their welcome. Christian missionaries such as Jesuits showed up in Japan expecting to be welcomed with open arms by the government. And that's not really how it happened. By the year 1600, European missionaries were successful in converting 300,000 Japanese people to Christianity, and the shogun was not happy about it. The Christian missionaries scoffed at Japanese culture and traditions and wouldn't stay out of Japanese politics either. Ieyasu decided it was time to run Christianity off by banning the religion entirely. This didn't stop when Ieyasu died either, for even his successors viewed Christianity as a plague on Japanese heritage. Due to pushback by converted Japanese citizens, it was decided that Christianity was the root issue within society and would be a threat to the Japanese way of life. Christian missionaries were then persecuted, and Japanese citizens were forced to practice Buddhism. This attempt to control foreign ideas by the Japanese government would lead to Japan's closed-door policy. When the Europeans originally showed up, the Japanese were worried that by banning Christian missionaries, the European merchants would follow and therefore cripple the Japanese economy. However, the Japanese realized they would be completely fine without trade relations from Europe. Japan closed its ports to all foreign traders, except for one in Nagasaki, which was open to both the Chinese and the Dutch, who've already clearly shown they're willing to respect the customs of those they trade with. On top of excluding most foreign imports, Japan refused to let its citizens leave in order to keep people from bringing foreign ideas back with them. Major review for a second. If you think about it, or if you remember at all, this sounds just like Sparta from ancient Greece. With major nations such as China and Japan closing themselves off from European markets, the European nations will have to look elsewhere for exploration and expansion. This will force them to turn all of their attention to the New World, where we'll see Europeans open up a whole new can of worms that come with colonization. So, I'll see you guys then.